That is the most beautiful city in the world, and this program enables councils right across our state to apply through the New South Wales Government to share in this investment. And this provides great opportunities. You can see many people today out and about, walking, using their prams with their young children and using the cycleways. And I think that pandemic has shown the importance of us to continue to invest, not just in our cities and our hard infrastructure across the state, but importantly in our local neighbourhoods. So we made the decision last year to appoint an Active Transport Minister in Rob Stokes. Many people said why, and I think we can see today why we're doing that, to provide greater opportunity for people to come and enjoy the great outdoors, our natural beauty of our great suburbs. And I think right here along the Parramatta River, we see many people out today, whilst it's a bit wet, but they're still out enjoying the best that New South Wales has to offer. And I think this city continues to grow incredibly well. Minister Lee will speak to that, the importance of the investments in our cities. But these investments today also ensure that we continue to make sure that our neighbourhoods grow and grow well. We invest in open spaces and we invest in paths. We invest in these cycleways so that people right across our state can enjoy the very best of our neighbourhoods, but importantly as well, our cities off the back of it. Before I pass to Minister Stokes, I want to make a point in relation to our booster program as well. So we've now hit about over 50% of the eligible population. We've had a booster shot. That's incredibly important. We had at the All-Stars game last night, we had a walk-in centre for many people to come through. And I want to reiterate, right across our state, our 40 centres, over the month, you can walk in without an appointment on the weekends. We know that boosters save lives. We know that booster shots ensure that our hospitalisation and ICU presentations are reduced. So can I continue to urge people across our state? I know it's been a difficult 2 years, but those efforts that we've made over the past 2 years, those sacrifices will need to continue as we move through this period of time. We can get that booster shot rate up. That will ensure that you look after yourself, your friends and your family. As I said, I know it's been difficult. I know the efforts that everyone has continued to make through the vaccination program, but boosters are incredibly important. And the facts are very clear, not just here, but around the country and around the world. Boosters save lives. So I encourage everybody across our state, if it's been 3 months since your second dose vaccination, or it's been 4 to 6 weeks since you've had COVID, please make an appointment, or even better, please just walk into any of our centres over the weekend, over this next month. We have capacity in our system, and I encourage everybody to continue to make those efforts as we move through this period. And obviously as well, you can also make your appointment to your pharmacist and your GP. Now I'm going to pass to Minister Stokes to tell us how great this investment is today, doubling down on our active transport program here in New South Wales, and then Minister Lee will talk about what this program has done for the great city of Parramatta.
Thanks everyone, thanks Premier, and thanks Minister and Member for Parramatta, Jeff Lee. What an amazing backdrop to announce a really exciting doubling of our investment into local councils and parkland agencies to promote active mobility across New South Wales. And what do we mean by that? We mean cycleways, we mean shared paths, we mean footways, so that everyone in our community can be part of building back better, to include everyone in our amazing 6 cities across metropolitan New South Wales and the great towns and cities across regional New South Wales as well. This investment means it'll be easier and safer for parents to let their children walk and cycle to school. It'll make it easier and safer for people to commute to work by walking or cycling. It'll also make it easier and safer for older people or people with disabilities to get safely around their local communities. This is a government that has built its reputation, it's forged its reputation on building the big bits of infrastructure that our community has been crying out for decades. The motorways, the metros, the light rails. But what this investment today recognises is those smaller projects are just as important in building a great community. That's why this investment in new cycleways, in new pathways, in new shared paths across this state will make a meaningful difference in making people's lives better. And after all, that's as a government, that's what we're here to do. We're here to govern, and we're here to make this state even better post-pandemic. Why this is such a great backdrop is the Parramatta Escarpment Boardwalk, which has been committed to and funded by the member for Parramatta, Jeff Lee, $16 million worth of state investment. We've built it and they have come. You only need to look around to see the number of people walking with prams, on mobility scooters, people cycling with their families, to see that these investments work and they build better and stronger communities. And that's one thing that we've learnt powerfully through this pandemic. And as a government, we're keen to use this opportunity to double our investment in bikeways, in shared paths and pedestrian pathways.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Can I just recognise all the journos? Great to see you all here in Parramatta. You're so interested in shared bikeways and pedestrian ways, so thank you for coming along today. Can I say that thank you, Premier, thank you, Minister Stokes, for your commitment to active transit ways. Can I say Parramatta is an example of investment in cycleways, bikeways, pedestrian pathways is so important. We opened, 18 months ago, we opened the Escarpment Boardwalk. We've actually doubled the number of pedestrians, the number of users of that pathway from 1 million to close to 2 million people. It forms a vital link from Parramatta Park right down to Sydney Olympic Park. We saw that, especially in the cities like Parramatta, we saw that during the pandemic, people were getting out and about and wanted safe areas to actually exercise, to actually take time out, to actually get healthy. But what they do is more than that. They actually provide links that people can actually get to work. So instead of getting on the bus, on the train, or in the cars, even worse, on the roads, you can actually use these cycleways, pathways to actually get to work, and quite often they're a lot faster. We see the rapid uptake of electric bikes. A lot of people in Parramatta have electric bikes. They simply, from their home, they can use these, get off road, actually come here safely. For the kids, it's so important. It connects some of the higher density areas to the schools. Every great community, every great city has great pathways to allow people to actually get out and actually not get in the car and actually spend the time by walking around their city. We're very proud. We've got significant more investments coming along through Parramatta. I think every great city needs connectivity, and this is an example. The Escarpment Boardwalk, this boardwalk right to Olympic Park is a great example of that. Thank you.
Questions?
Premier, are you disappointed with the swings against your government in the by-elections overnight?
Look, I think it's certainly disappointing to lose the seat of Bega. I think that's certainly the way it looks like it's heading. It's a tough day, but ultimately from a government perspective, it's important when you have tough days at the office that you reflect on those results, you learn from what, learn from it, look at what we could be doing better, and ultimately also look at those things that the good that's come out of it. So obviously it's a tough day, disappointing day at the office, and we'll continue to work, both myself and all the ministers in our cabinet, to continue to take our state forward and learn from these results yesterday.
But you
Labor made it a very clear. Labor all along said make it to send a message to you about your handling of the Omnic runway. Do you get the message? Is that how you're reading the results?
I think there's four very different seats. When you look at the different issues in each of the electorates, I think certainly if I reflect on Bega, that we need to improve our communication in setting out our great track record in that electorate. I mean, there's no doubt that Bega is in a much better place today than it was 10 years ago. And Labor ran on a campaign about building a level 4 hospital in Eurobodella, which we're already building. So there's certainly messages out of that for us to look at in terms of what we're doing on the ground, and we're doing a lot. $108 billion of infrastructure over the next 4 years. We've built a lot over the 10 years in government, but I think it's certainly true that we've got to get our message out more clearly. But in addition to that, I think ultimately when you're in a pandemic, you're going to make decisions that at time to time will be unpopular. Our job here as a government is to take our state through, and we're doing that. And I think if you look where New South Wales is today in this pandemic, we're in a very strong position, and so is our country more broadly. But we'll continue to make those decisions to learn to live alongside the virus, and to make sure that New South Wales comes out the other side stronger. Go back 2 years, it's been a tough time. We've had a tough run of it here in our state and our country in relation to the pandemic. But when you take a step back, and even today, if you look at the hospitalisations and ICU presentations, I think things are certainly heading in the right direction, and that's on the success I think that everybody has made in our state, standing tall, facing into the virus, and we're going to get through it. We can't hide away. We've got to move through. And I want to thank everybody across our state for the efforts they've made. But look, there's certainly lessons to be taken from it. Every seat's different, but obviously Bega was particularly disappointing yesterday.
Premier, in Bega, you said that you need to work on your communication. Do you take any personal responsibility for that breakdown in communication, given that last week, in the lead up to the vote, you didn't go there?
Well, I was there a week ago.
In the last week leading up to the
Yeah,
vote,
look,
you weren't in Bega though.
My job is to govern for the state. We're in the middle of a pandemic and to take our state forward. That's my focus. But I take responsibility for the result. I take responsibility as Premier of the state. I'm the leader of the government, and my job is to communicate clearly where our state's going, and ensure we continue to move forward. And that's exactly what we're doing. And ultimately, as a leader, it falls on me. It is my responsibility. But I am incredibly confident in the direction of our state. I'm incredibly confident in our people to move forward. Now, by-elections, as we know, are notoriously hard for governments. But I think there's some green shoots yesterday as well. I mean, to see what would appear to be a swing towards the government in the seat of Strathfield, I think we can take a lot from that as well. But there's no doubt there's some disappointing results across the board, and we'll reflect on that and learn from it.
You said that there would be lessons to be taken. What lessons will you take from these results?
Well, I think if we're talking about the pandemic, we're on the right track. It's the hard road, but the right road. We've said that. We've said. No, I think New South Wales is in a very strong position in relation to the pandemic. We are taking the right approach. We're leading the nation out of the pandemic. Now, it's easy in a pandemic. If you take the populist approach in a pandemic, you're doing the wrong thing by your people. That's a fact. We're seeing that in WA, a highly popular Premier with a lockdown mentality. Now, that works in the short term. It doesn't work in the long term. And ultimately, in a pandemic or in any situation like the one we found ourselves in, you've got to make sure you're always doing what's right. Importantly, you've got to communicate that. You've got to take the community with you, and I think you can certainly take that from the results yesterday. But also, more broadly, each of those seats had very different issues, and I think that if you look at particularly Bega, which is obviously the most disappointing result for the government, there's a lot to take out of that in terms of, we've got a strong track record there. Obviously, it's a community in Bega that's gone through a very difficult time off the back of the bushfires, and I'll look into that in terms of, I certainly felt that on the ground. I mean, to Liz's question, asked what are some of the issues on the ground, and I certainly felt that at embargo. I met with many people in that community who are still doing it tough. I mean, the recovery in those areas of the bushfires is still ongoing, and the feedback on the ground is going to take many years. So, I certainly reflect on that. But ultimately, our resolve does not change. Our resolve does not change, and that is to continue to invest in our state, to continue to invest in the things that matters to families right across the board. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to continue to do. And in relation to the pandemic, we're going to continue to lead our state forward. That's what's most important right now. And we are going through a transition. We've spoken for 2 years now about learning to live alongside the virus. But whilst we were saying that, we were still going through lockdowns. We had a highly unvaccinated population. We're seeing around the world now, the world moving and facing into it. We have to do the same thing in Australia. And we're leading the way in New South Wales. And I'm very confident in our people that we'll continue to have a strong health response in this state because of the substantial investments that we've made over the 10 years in government. And in addition to that, ensure that we keep the society open, keep the economy moving, keeping businesses open, and keeping people in work.
So you're telling voters today that the takeaway from what you've got from the election result is basically like you're still happy, you're going to push on as is, you're just going to communicate better how good your government is going.
No, that's not what I said, Ash. I said in terms of the pandemic, our approach is the right approach. And the feedback on the ground in each of those seats was very much focused on local issues. And I think if I look, I just spoke earlier about Bega and where the government could have done better in relation to the bushfire response. It's still a community that is in pain, that is still recovering from one of the most difficult bushfire summers we've ever had. I saw that firsthand. I met people firsthand who spoke to me about that, and clearly we could have done better as a government here in our state. I think we'll certainly reflect on that. But as I said, every seat is different. What I am saying in relation to the pandemic is that our approach is the right approach to take our state forward. And my job as Premier is to do what's right, not what is necessarily popular in the middle of a pandemic, and I'll continue to do that. But I think there are certainly lessons to be taken from each of those seats, and we'll reflect on it. But as well, there are some green shoots. I mean, to see the results in Parramatta, in Strathfield. I mean, when was the last time, to be in a seat like Strathfield, to have a swing towards us in government, I think is pleasing. But I think what that goes to, if you look around the grounds on yesterday's results, 4 very different seats, 4 very different issues at play, and we'll reflect on it and learn from it. But ultimately, Ash will take responsibility for the result.
Premier, in Willoughby, it's looking like an 18% seat. That's a very bad day in the office for you. I mean, how are you interpreting that result and that message that that community is obviously sending to everyone?
But there are good days and bad days in the office. The main thing is that you reflect on it, you learn from it.
What have you reflected? What have you learned? What is that message?
Well, Willoughby, I would have been very happy if Tim James won by 1 vote in Willoughby yesterday. As I said, by-elections are very difficult. If I look at the seat of Willoughby, there's certainly a strong independent campaign there on the ground over the last couple of weeks, particularly in relation to the Northern Beaches Tunnel and concerns in relation to the impact of that tunnel on the Willoughby community. So I think that's something that really came through, and the independent who got a very strong vote, that was one of the main areas that she was campaigning on. So as we move through that infrastructure investment of the Northern Beaches Tunnel, I think those community concerns need to be taken on board a bit more by the government, and I'll certainly be sitting down with the new member and working through that. And I know that, and certainly being in the government, Minister Stokes spoke about the fact that we're a government that's built a lot of infrastructure over the 10 years, and the challenge any governments have when you're investing significant amounts in infrastructure, whether it's major projects like the WestConnex, Western Harbour Tunnel, Northern Beaches Tunnel, it causes community concern and angst at time to time and a lot of inconvenience. But ultimately, it's a choice between going backwards or going forwards. And I want to lead a government that's going forward. I want to lead a government that continues to make those investments. I certainly think during the WestConnex project, and I played when I was finance minister, did a fair bit of work in when we were doing housing acquisitions. I think certainly when we built WestConnex, there were things we could have done a lot better at that time in terms of working with the community rather than just getting on and ploughing ahead. And I think what I've learnt from yesterday, particularly in the seat of Willoughby, is that we need to make sure as a government, as we are building those major infrastructure projects that are incredibly important and set up our state for future success, that we bring the community with us on the journey, and probably more consultation on those projects is better. Now, I will say on the Northern Beaches Tunnel, we're in very early days, but I certainly heard loud and clear yesterday the community concerns in the seat of Willoughby. It's probably a community as well that won't get the tangible benefit from that project, but will have an impact as a result. So I certainly want to work with the local member to mitigate, and work with the roads minister to mitigate those concerns, understand and appreciate them as we move forward.
You said you won't change your approach to the pandemic moving forward, but in hindsight, is there anything you would change? Do you regret opening as quickly as you did in December, for example?
I think the one thing that probably struck me about that was, as we've transitioned, that's brought its challenges. We had a highly furloughed workforce with a highly transmissible variant. We didn't just see that in New South Wales, we saw that around the country. But it's still the right approach, and I know that brings concerns in the short term, but it's the right approach in the long term. And the reality is, as you've seen around the world, you just got to look at the facts. Around the world, even lockdowns have not stopped the rapid transmission of Omicron. But the good news in relation to all of that is we have a much less severe variant of the disease. So that's the positive. And when you look at the case numbers today, I think they're around 6,000. So they are dropping. And I think our ICUs are dropping, hospitalisations are dropping, and that's incredibly pleasing. And we've been able to do that in a circumstance where, compared to other states, we've got Victoria, where they're using their hotels as hospitals. I mean, we've stood very strong, but there's been incredible inconveniences for people over the course of the last 2 years, and particularly over summer. But I really do feel confident our state is coming through and leading the nation out of the pandemic, and that doesn't mean there's not going to be other challenges that come our way. Who knows? I mean, if I've learned anything over the last 2 years of being a member of the crisis cabinet, is we just don't know what curveballs this pandemic's going to throw at us. But what I do know is what we can control, and what we can control is our vaccination rate and our boosters, because that is clear. If you look at across our nation in terms of the death rate, hospitalisations and ICU presentations compared to anywhere else in the world, they're incredibly low. And that's particularly on the early days. And why was that? Because the decision to close the international borders was a tough one the federal government made, but ultimately it was one that pretty much locked out the virus, our hotel quarantine program. So when you had a more deadly variant of the disease with an unvaccinated population, it led to significant death rates around the world. We avoided that, and so the message, that's why I keep making the point in relation to vaccination, because it's very clear that a high vaccination rate puts downward pressure on ICU presentations, downward pressure on hospitalisations, and ultimately the death rate. So I'm incredibly confident. I'm incredibly confident with the approach we're taking. I accept that it may not be popular, but it's certainly the right approach to take going forward. And we need to live alongside the virus. We need to open up and keep our society open as we move through and face into the virus. We're seeing around the world other countries doing exactly the same thing. But there are many lessons to take out of these by-elections. I take responsibility for the result, and we'll take that on board and move forward.
Premier, your Treasurer said last night that recent issues in the federal Liberal Party with Prime Minister Scott Morrison, his troubles, have reflected badly on the Liberal brand and which could have hurt your by-elections. Do you agree?
I don't think so. I don't think so. As I said, I take responsibility for the results yesterday. I believe that people across our state distinguish between federal issues and state issues. People can commentate around that. People may have their opinions on it, but as leader of the state, I take responsibility for the results yesterday, and I look at the results through a prism of what we can do better as a state government, not what other governments can do better.
So what do you say then to marginal seat holders, your MPs, who next year will face voters, when you're acknowledging that your approach to COVID may not be popular, is right, and you're not going to change it? What do you say to your MPs who might be punished for that unpopular approach as you?
Well, I'm very confident with the direction of the state. I'm very confident with where we're going as a people. We are facing into the virus and we are moving forward and getting ahead. That's the right thing to do. So my message to our members would be, we stay the course. We need to keep society open. We need to move through. We cannot wish away the virus. We have to stand strong. And our role in public life, our role as leaders, is to be there to lead, is to be there to set the example. And there's no doubt in a pandemic there is naturally going to be concern right across the state, in every single community. But we're here to do what's right. I'll tell you the worst thing to do. The worst thing to do in public life, particularly in a pandemic, would be to simply pursue the populist approach. And I certainly didn't sign up for that. I got into public life to do what is right and to lead our people through this pandemic. That's what I will do. And I believe by doing what is right, ultimately by doing what is right, you will be successful, and those members will be successful. So it's important to stay the course. It's important to not follow the populist approach. But at the same time, to talk about your earlier question, James, in relation to the federal government, I think the greater reflection for me so far on yesterday's results is really on those local issues, and that's certainly the feedback I received on the ground when I was out in those seats, and also my members were out in those seats, and from the local candidates. Particularly the health concerns in Bega. I think that's certainly a challenge. I talk about community, I talk about communication because we're getting criticised for building a hospital. Much better to be criticised for building something than not building anything at all. But I just think our message in terms of bringing that all together in terms of what's the future and vision for communities right across our state, particularly in the South Coast. That certainly struck me from yesterday's result.
Just in terms of the numbers, you go. Sorry. Yeah, just in terms of the numbers now, you're 45 now probably. What happens now? Are you going to have to do deals to get some legislation through the lower house now?
No, I don't think so. We've been in almost a minority government setting for the entire term.
Yeah, you've always had John Sidoti and Gareth Ward to pretty much rely on. Now you're down one further.
Well, I mean, I think we saw that last year. We had a piece of legislation in the Legislative Assembly, and we had to work through. But that's okay. That's the role of the Parliament. The role of the government is to work with the crossbench. That doesn't mean involving deals. That means involving selling the virtue of the legislation you're trying to pass. I have complete faith in members in the lower house. If the bill that we're introducing from any minister is the right bill that's going to help the people of our state, that it will garner support. That may not happen all the time, accept that, and that creates its challenges. We've had those challenges in the upper house now for 3 years, so I don't really see any substantive change in relation to that. And I think the constructive dialogue and relationship that we've had with the crossbench in the lower house has been incredibly positive. They see their role as keeping stability in the Parliament. They've seen that role. They've seen their role. Their part to play in that over the last 3 years, and I don't see any real substantive change in the Legislative Assembly as a result of yesterday in terms of the stability of the Parliament, and my approach won't change in terms of continuing to work with the crossbench for the betterment of the people of New South Wales. So if the legislation has merit, now sometimes obviously there's controversial legislation that goes through and you've got to negotiate that. And I think there'll be a focus, as we saw last year before these by-elections, in terms of discussions with the crossbench in the lower house. But now, we'll just continue the same approach. And as I said, if ministers can't convince the Parliament that it's the right thing to do, you can hardly convince the people of New South Wales. So that's the role of the Parliament.
You do though, in the loss of Bega, you put yourself a step back in what is already an uphill battle in 2023 though. So can you win? You have to pick up 3 seats now in 2023. Can you win Bega back?
Well, I think we've got a great story to tell in Bega, and I think our role. By-elections, these are notoriously hard for governments. We've seen that.
You've conceded that what happened in Bega did not happen because it's a by-election. What happened in Bega happened because they feel abandoned. So you've conceded that already. Yeah. So can you win it back? What are you going to do to win Bega?
Oh, I believe we'll win it back. I think we've got to communicate very clearly, listen to the community. I think the bushfires, the most striking thing to me is it's a community that's hurting. It's a community that's struggling to recover from the devastating bushfires, the loss of life, the loss of property. The hurt and pain is still very raw, and governments need to be there to help our communities through. So I certainly take that from the result, and we'll take it on board and continue to work with the community to get them back on track as quickly as possible. As I said, when I was in Cobargo, many people said to me down in Cobargo that they thought it could take 10 years, even longer, to get that community back to where it was prior to the bushfires. Well, that's not acceptable. We need to do everything we can to improve that. And so hearing that firsthand was pretty cutting, and certainly made me think there's a lot more to do, and it needs to be a greater priority for the government going forward. So just, you reflect on the challenges and the devastation of that community. I think we certainly saw that in the result yesterday. And you think about that and see what we can do, and where we can do more, we will do more. But to sit there and hear from people in Cobargo that their kind of view is it'll take a decade to get back to where things were before, well, that's not acceptable. And that's on us, and that's on me to fix it.
I want to write about COVID.
One more while. Premier, you said last time you reckon you can win back, you can win Strathfield next year.
Yeah.
What makes you so confident?
Well, it looks like we're getting a swing towards us in a Labor seat in what's been a pretty challenging time. So let's look at the seats. I mean, the seats are all very different. I think there's a lot of, like we talk about, like any bad day in the office, you take a step back and you've got to reflect on it, right? And and you learn from those areas you could be doing better. But then you also look at, it's like any game. You sit back and you get beaten. You've got to say, well, what went wrong? What can we do better? But also reflect on what went well. And I think Strathfield was a very good sign for the government. A very diverse metropolitan seat with a very strong candidate in Bridget Saker, to be in a position where we had a swing towards the government in that seat, I think is an incredibly strong result. Well, I spoke to her last night. I certainly encouraged her to do so, and she committed to running. And I think Bridget Saker is an extraordinary person. For her to have gone through what she went through and respond in the way that she has is a lesson for all of us. And for somebody who has gone through, I mean, we could never imagine going through as a parent what she has. I certainly wouldn't know how I would be able to deal with that situation. But she's certainly shown us all how to. That sense of forgiveness is incredible. And the fact that, and I know from what she's privately spoken to me about, the importance of the community, the impact when she went through that personal tragedy of her aunt, the support that she was given by the local community, the fact that she then made a decision that she wanted to give back, I think is incredibly powerful. And I believe she'll be the member for Strathfield. And based on my discussions with her last night, I think she's up for it. And I think she'll do a fantastic job in representing that community.
On COVID, so the restrictions are set to ease on March 1st. It seems that they will be eased on March 1st as the masks inside.
27th, I think.
28th.
28th.
And then the next day is 1st March. Anyway, the point being...
I thought it was the 27th and the 28th.
Oh,
Oh, okay,
Like
Sam.
you, you're normally across the
Oh,
big
Mr.
town.
They're in
Captain
place.
Health Order over here.
They're in place until the 28th of February, actually.
You sure?
Yes. Beside the point. At the moment, you have this recommendation that people work from home if they can. That's not actually in the rules, but it's a recommendation. Will you
No.
change that recommendation on February 28th in line with the easing of restrictions to tell bosses that they can bring their workers back into the office?
Well, firstly, that's a matter for Cabinet, not a matter for a press conference, and we will consider that.
It's not a policy
No, but-
in the rules. It's just something that...
But no, no. So we've set a date. We've got a roadmap. We've set a date. That date is in place. But what's pleasing, what is incredibly pleasing right now, is our hospitalisations and ICU presentations are well within capacity. They are. When we went through that, when we released those 3 scenarios, we are well within our best case scenario. That's incredibly important and pleasing. And our cabinet, our COVID and Economic Recovery Committee will meet. I want people back in the city. I want people back in Parramatta. Here we are in Parramatta. I want people back here. I want the public servants back to work in the office. I want people to return to the city. We saw that last year twice. We had to do it after Alpha, we had to do it after Delta, and now we're going to do it again. And hopefully this is the last time.
So considering that, and given that there is no actual rule to tell bosses that they...
There's no public health order. There's a recommendation where you can work from home. Now, obviously, in terms of the changes that we would make as part of that suite of measures, then that rule or from the government would be part of those changes.
So when public servants going to be told come back into
Well, that would be part of that. That would be part of that decision when it is made. But as early as we can do it, the better. I want our cities to thrive. We know when our cities go well, the Sydney CBD and the Parramatta CBD, the state goes well. There are so many businesses here that rely on people being in the office. I believe being in the office is incredibly important for productivity as well. And it's incredibly important to get back on with life. We're seeing it around the world. Australia has to follow and do the same. We can't hide away. We're in this unique situation now where the Western Australian border is still closed. What world are we living in? Like, we've done everything. People have made enormous efforts to get vaccinated, to get boosted. The virus is not going away. It's not going away. So what we have to do is live alongside it. That's a challenge. But the best thing we could have done right at the outset, and I've said it numerous times, my two priorities were to get kids back in the class. He's happy. He's back at school. That's why he's happy. We got kids back in the classroom on day one, and it has gone incredibly well. There were many people who said we shouldn't do it, including the doctors' union, said we shouldn't do it. Well, they were wrong. We did it, and we've done it safely. And I want to thank parents for the sacrifices and the efforts they've made, and for the kids who had to go through that RAT testing. In addition, to bring back non-urgent elective surgery as quickly as possible. They are the two priorities. Kids back, tick. In relation to non-urgent elective surgery, we brought that back in the private health system. I want to get it back as much as possible, and working with the local health districts at the moment to do that, and I'll work through that. But James, the answer to your question is, I want people back in the city. I want people back in the office as quickly as possible, and clearly things like face masks in the office and things like that are a significant impediment. So we're working through it, and we're going to get it done.
the border opens in a week. Will you change the health order to ensure that people who have 2 doses, not 3, can avoid hotel quarantine?
Yes, but I'm not sure. I know you're the king of the public health order, but I will take legal advice in relation to whether or not. No.
Can I just go back to the ability results just quickly?
Yeah.
We know that Glasgow was really popular with women, the 30 to 50 age bracket. Do you think the result, perhaps, in ability is a symptom that women are going to be harder to get across the line now for the Liberal Party without Gladys Berejiklian, and seeing that Larissa Penn did so well?
Well, Gladys Berejiklian was a trailblazer for women in the state, and she's been a long-serving member for the people of Willoughby and has done an amazing job, and is an incredibly popular premier. It's always going to be difficult. I mean, look at yesterday's results. We had 4 members. It's a bit of substantial change in the parliament. I mean, we've had 4 long-serving members. That's why these by-elections are always going to be hard. You had Andrew Constance, who had been there in Bega, representing that community for decades, and had been not just made a substantive contribution to his electorate, but to the state of New South Wales. You had a deputy premier who had been there since for 10 years, highly popular, built the seat up for over a substantial period of time. I mean, he won it in 2011, and every election he just built up that seat because there was a substantial investments that have gone into the narrow electorate. And then with Glad as well, and she'd been there for years, she won that. And Glad's the same example. I mean, we talked about yesterday, it was a tough result across the board, but Glad won Willoughby when she came into Parliament by a couple of hundred votes. And then what did she do? She got in, worked hard, built it up. I expect the same thing of my ministers.
So you don't think you have a problem? You don't think it's going to be harder to get some female voters?
Well, I think it was certainly. I would certainly say that I think that was reflected in the result yesterday, and we need to do more, and we will. And I've said from the outset that that I want to encourage more women into the parliamentary ranks of the Liberal Party. I've always said we need to do better. I think our track record is pretty poor in that space, and we need to encourage members within our organisation to put their hands up. And whilst I don't run the organisation, I think as Premier of the state, I'll have a responsibility and obligation to kind of lead and work with the party to do that. And I will.
Premier, in the room last night in Strathfield, I think the first thing you said when you walked into the room with Bridget Saker was, "How good is Bridget Saker?"
Great. How great?
Or how great is Bridget Saker? Were you sort of paying homage to the Prime Minister's favourite catchphrase there? What was going on?
Didn't come into my mind. It was just you know, it was an enthusiastic room, and you know, I think they were disappointed. I think they really believed that they were going to get over the line, and you know, I think she's great. I think she's great, and I think I think that the fact that she put her hand up to run, and the campaign they ran a great campaign out there. I mean, not sure what was the swing in Willoughby.
18.
I mean, you had an 18% swing against Willoughby, and you got to swing towards the Liberals in Strathfield. I mean, it was a great campaign, great candidate.
And just lastly, you're 12 months away from a statewide election. If you average out all the swings in the 4 electorates last night, obviously those numbers are not fantastic for you. So what do you do to change people's minds? You say you want to, I think you said last night, you want to win back people's trust. Well, that implies that you've lost it. So how did you lose their trust, and what will you do to win it back?
Well, I think I said all those different seats had different issues. So you've got to work through what you got to
So
work.
it's not a you problem, it's a local problem.
Well, it's a combination of both. I take responsibility for the results yesterday. I'm the leader of the government. It's on me. People say, oh, you know, what about the federal government? What about the state? No, it's on me as the leader. And we have a very strong government. We have a great track record in this state. We've turned around our state from the mess that was left by Labor, and there's a long way to go. And we've got to keep getting on with the job and building that trust. But you know, by-elections are hard. By-elections are hard for every government. We always see swings, but I reflect on that. The team will reflect on it, and we get back to work day one today. You know, and move forward. Tough days at the office, but you know, there'll always be good days at the office as well.
And for me, the success that we saw for some of those independents yesterday, I mean, are you anticipating that you're going to be facing off against a lot more independents and a lot more seats?
Are you saying on the North Shore?
I'm saying, well, Larissa Penn picking up, and also, you know, 10% in Strathfield going to Barrowley.
That was disappointing.
Are you expecting to see that in more seats in the upcoming general election next year, that you could be seeing more and more independents picking up those votes, perhaps maybe more of those votes?
I'm not sure. But what I have learned is that when you're in a by-election, as I said, I would have been happy if Tim Jones won by 1 vote in Willoughby. Because what happens is, in by-elections, you just want to you want your candidates to get over the line. Obviously yesterday was disappointing to lose Bega. I mean, it was. Incredibly. But I would say, Lucy, that my expectation is, just as we've seen with other members who get over the line in by-elections or swings against them, they get in, they work hard, and they build it back up. And they build trust. It takes time. It's very hard for somebody to be following someone like Gladys Berejiklian, who's been there for many, many years, serving that community, for that trust to be won over overnight. It takes time, but I have complete confidence Tim will do it. He's a good man. He's a very good man, and he'll fight hard. He's a strong campaigner. He's passionate about local issues, and I believe the community will come with him. It just takes that will take time to build up, like anything. And you know, you know, we're seeing, I think, at the federal level, that strong independent pushing some of those seats. And we've got to continue to drive the strength of the government and take our state forward. And I'm incredibly confident. You know, yes, I said you have bad days at the office and you have good days at the office, but you reflect on that. You look at what could be improved, and at the same time, you take out what's good. I think there's certainly some good signs from yesterday as well. Thanks.
Last question, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's it, Rob. Yeah. Performance on October and